Hey guys, this is Sam the Leftist on my YouTube video. Today we're going to be talking to my good friend Ronald Ceessay on gentrification and how it affects him, and he's on the front lines of gentrification. I'll just let him speak. So the first question for you, Ronald, is could you describe in your own words what gentrification is?
Well, gentrification is basically I don't want to say systematic destruction, but the when different people from a different neighborhood enter into a usually lower income neighborhood and change up the area, usually renovate houses. This contributes to other things, not only to higher pricings, but to different activities being available, different shops, and just the overall change of the culture within the neighborhood. So, yeah.
Have you noticed any new housing development in the neighborhood that may be a tool for gentrification?
Well, not near mine area. It's like there's not near. It hasn't been struck by gentrification nearly as much as other areas. However, in many of my friends' areas closer to College Park, I would prefer to say, there have been many instances of gentrification. I remember when I went over there a couple years ago, there was still lower income housing and a predominantly clearly African American community there. However, when I recently went over there, maybe a couple months ago, all the houses have been changed, all the Atlanta United flags are up. And it's clear that the culture is different. It's nicer, however, it's clear that the former residents have been displaced.
And for those who don't know, Atlanta United is an Atlanta soccer team. Obviously, the demographics of soccer are going to be disproportionately white. Um, so it's kind of, included in it. So my next question for Ronald is, I understand you went up to boarding school for about a year, and I was wondering if you saw any changes in your neighborhood when you came back from boarding school.
In my neighborhood, I haven't seen many strong aspects of gentrification yet. However, I remember when I went up to boarding school, since gentrification isn't just an Atlanta issue, it's just an entire United States issue. And I went to Hartford since my boarding school's in Connecticut. I went to Hartford and I was seeing what the area was like. No, New Haven. Now seeing what the area was like, it's predominantly slowly being taken over by Yale and other collegiates and other younger people seeking to find cheap housing. While the crime rate has gone down in New Haven, so has the African American population within the city.
Okay, so within Atlanta, what are your neighbors and people in your neighborhood saying about gentrification? Are they experiencing their rent and housing prices go up?
Well, what we have seen with gentrification, one thing is more real estate developers are seeking to purchase our property. So that's like the beginning front of gentrification, where you have these scouts looking for cheap housing and cheaper housing to start building their new areas and sell these new areas. And I know my mother is working on a show based off of gentrification within the area with a real estate developer and other white people and millennials and such understanding that issue. But what I have heard traditionally like about gentrification is that it's not necessarily like on my perspective on it is that it's a complex issue and it's not completely bad, but many in the African American community perceive it as completely wrong because it does directly affect them and directly hurt them. But it has been but there are some benefits that we don't look at, but overall the people around me and in my neighborhood see it as a bad thing, which is true to the extent that affects them.
What are some simple things you can do on a personal level to help prevent you contributing from people being evicted from their homes as an effect of rising housing prices?
Well, the best way for it is primarily falls on there's two different ways. First, it falls on like the white people moving into our neighborhood, the younger millennials and such, moving into our neighborhood to actually understand the culture within our neighborhood and understand the historical aspects and understand different the culture that already resides in our neighborhood and respect the people that have been there for so long. But then it also falls on the African Americans and middle class African Americans, instead of fleeing to the suburbs, to buy housing that's there to prevent this issue, and the African Americans that are currently renting that are older to buy their homes instead of allowing them to be the rent to be skyrocketed and allowing real estate developers to buy your home for you.
Have you noticed any small businesses closing within your neighborhood because of less people going to them and more people moving in, going to more higher end chain stores?
Well, the thing is, since low income neighborhoods aren't built to have small businesses at all, especially in my area, they're built to have roads, like built to be primarily driven on by cars. Built for poor neighborhoods aren't built for anything small business wise, and any small business usually goes into different areas like Grand Park. However, but when gentrification does occur, that's when the small businesses finally pop up. That's when the what's it called? That's when the roads get paved and everything new and better comes around. And there are some small businesses in our area, but not nearly enough. And you've seen with areas such as West End and East Point that are becoming gentrified, more small businesses that are white owned are opening up while the area becomes more gentrified and the roads are becoming nicer, which is a good thing. However, the former residents are being displaced that were already there.
Are there some stuff that the government can do on a national level to help fight it? Also, you can't just say destruction of capitalism because, you know, that's the only way you truly solve it, but more so putting a band-aid over it.
Well, the best way to like rectify it per se, it would be to just give more affordable housing to these communities, not just for renting, but for actually buying houses to establish wealth, generational wealth within the community, so they're not so easily bought out, and give different incentives. I don't know what, but different incentives for people of their communities to stay within their communities and help that their community grow and become better instead of fleeing to suburbs and such, which have their own incentives. But overall, there is no true way to stop gentrification without the destruction of capitalism. So even though you told me not to say that, but
Yeah, it's definitely inevitable when more people are when the housing market's going to go where the profit goes. Obviously, someone's going to make more money building a Shake Shack than than public housing units, affordable housing. Um, so another question for you is, um, so do you feel that within Atlanta, gentrification is being handled well than it is nationally?
no, not at all, because Atlanta has one of the highest economic disparities in the entire United States. It is third or so, or a little around that, of highest gentrification in the city, in metropolitan cities. So that's, well, after like Harlem and other areas like that. But that's a problem since Atlanta has such a high African American population and has been called the Black Mecca or Black Hollywood and different things. This is a problem for our our Black communities that have given Atlanta so much fame and prominence, to be to be economically pushed out rather than, it's not assimilated, but rather than add to the society and really produce something more, but are being pushed out of their homes, and it's becoming progressively more white, and Atlanta's losing what it's been capitalizing on for a long time.
Do you view these new protests and riots in Atlanta as not only an issue about police brutality and obviously the death of George Floyd and many other African American people in the past few months, but also an issue of rising rent and people not being able to get their needs met? So they're going to resort to violence out of anger.
Yeah, everything's connected, especially based off of race. Everything is attributed back to race, because there all these issues happen. Like communities are over policed, like African American communities are over policed because they are lower income and are allowed to be over policed. But once gentrification happens, they aren't over policed nearly as much anymore, and that's in of itself a problem. And all of these problems have been existing within the African American community for so long, and have just been really frustrating. Like Martin Luther King said, a riot is the language of the unheard. And once people keep being consistently pushed out of their communities and spit down by the system that they've been playing into for such a long time, it eventually forces a riot of some sort, or anger and commotion of any sort.
What cities do you view as ultra hotspots of gentrification?
Oh, Harlem, well, Harlem, San Antonio. What's another city? I remember I was looking at the list. Richmond, I believe, which was not, yeah,
Virginia, correct?
yeah, Richmond, somewhere in South Carolina. I can remember which where. And I know Atlanta was on that list. What else?
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, yes. A couple more black hotspots, such there's one in California, I believe. I can't
Did
remember.
you mention Oakland?
Ah, Oakland, there it is. So there's many cities that are predominantly black have been gentrified in some way, because it's just a never-ending cycle. It started in when their parents had houses within the city, and then they moved. Then their children moved out to the suburbs, and their parents died, and then African Americans sometimes moved into the houses were already there, and then the children came back to the area, and it's just a never-ending cycle until African Americans truly start buying homes and really starts in the middle class African Americans stop leaving and buying homes within their own community.
What's your thoughts on African American and poor people being kicked out of their communities and having to buy or rent homes in the suburbs?
It's horrible. It's very bad. It a lot of times, especially what happens is that when communities are and they can't afford these rising rent prices, they'll go to even lower income neighborhoods and contribute to even worse system of poverty that is there, and goes lower in the caste system of the United States, and thus it attributes to even more problems within the black community after that happens. And then also it's what happens for like middle, as I've said a lot, is that like a lot of middle class black people, once they realize that they finally get out of this area, instead of like buying their houses like many white people do, they will just sell the house off to another white person, in which affects gentrification, and then go off to a different area that that they've just seen idealized in American culture for so long, that includes suburbs and housing and single home complexes, which are also a root of the problem.
It's also important to say, in terms of African American people moving to the suburbs, is there's not any good public transportation in the suburbs. While public transportation often in cities isn't the best, there's at least some. And suburbs, in often cases, there's not even any sidewalks, so they can't walk anywhere, and that also leads to rising obesity rates.
Oh yes,
Um,
are trapped because like there's only one way in, one way out, and it's just gross, and every house looks the same.
yeah. Is there any final thoughts you have, Ronald?
Well, since the gentrification has become much more of the forefront now, because a lot of the race issues within America are usually pitched as like the racist versus the non-racist, whereas gentrification, it has liberal people do it too, conservative people do it too, just white people as a whole, they overall do it, especially like more liberal millennials, they do it a lot too. So now after the George Floyd protests and many riots across the nation and just protests in general have really spurred this into the forefront again, and especially after coronavirus, after they're losing the $600 unemployment soon, it is it's really coming back into the forefront again, and more people are recognizing how big of an issue it is for the African American community. And really, all together, we're now working on solutions to stop it, hopefully.
Thank you. Where can we find you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at Ceessay, but you can also find me on my YouTube channel at Ronald Ceessay, since I am the filmmaker. And yeah.
Okay. Thanks for chatting, Ronald.
Thank you. Thank you very much.